everyone, to the Bodybuilding Dietitians podcast. You're joined for another episode with your usual hosts, myself, Damien, and Tiara. So we've got our very first listener Q&A. So we've got quite a few questions to get through. Typically in TBD fashion, we say we'll do some fairly short, sharp, efficient answers, but then we end up getting into some extended responses. So we can't promise that we'll get through every question today, but we appreciate every listener or everyone on Instagram asking a question. And if we don't get to your question today, then there'll be plenty of episodes to come. So also we received a few different questions on like the reverse diet, the recovery diet, approaching eating post-show, beating cravings and binges as an athlete as well. And we addressed a lot of those points in the previous episode. So please, tune into that previous episode. And if you have any follow-ups from that, don't hesitate to ask us more questions or even reach out to us on Instagram as well. So we'll get straight into this first question, which says, are steps or cardio better for fat loss? What do you think about that, Tiara?
Ooh, well, there's so many different angles that you can approach this question from. But, this is very common in bodybuilding, especially when people are more so like, in the camp of I only do steps or I only do cardio. But I think as we've said on TBD before, we don't really like to choose camps. We like to think as though we're like in some sort of hammock swinging over a lake. We're like, it's an in-between. You can have both. But there's so many benefits to both steps and cardio. And I'm personally under the impression that whether or not you're in a prep or an improvement season, or heck, even if you're not just a bodybuilder, right? Like there's so much merit in step counts and walking, but there's also so much merit in having good cardio respiratory fitness too. So I think regardless of the phase or regardless of who you are, actually putting an emphasis on both is going to be really fantastic for your overall physical health, your mental health. There's so many benefits, especially for just walking out in nature, for clearing your mind, for creativity. It's great for insulin sensitivity. It's great for your digestion. The list goes on and on and on. And then, of course, having great cardio respiratory fitness, that's going to be like the number one factor that's probably going to increase your lifespan as a human being as well. But yeah, what do you think, Jack? And what do you think, Damien, when it comes to fat loss, right? When people are thinking about, okay, I either do steps or cardio for a means of burning off calories, do you think that one is going to be better than the other for losing body fat?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think that we know that body fat is lost through a calorie deficit. So can you localize body fat loss or more strategically target body fat loss through increase in steps or cardio? It's an interesting one. Like the short answer is not really, but potentially like you may have improved insulin sensitivity with being more cardiovascularly fit, and you may just be healthier as an overall human being, which may potentially help certain areas of body fat storage, like around central adiposity, as opposed to peripheral or subcutaneous body fat. Like typically, potentially there may be a relationship between like body fat storage in your extremities, having less there essentially, but maybe having more central adiposity, which we see fairly often just in terms of Western culture in general, not necessarily through us as practitioners specifically. So that would be one consideration, but not really overly pertinent to the demographic that's listening to this podcast. So I think more strategically for comp prep or bodybuilders or fitness enthusiasts, I think, they aren't equal in terms of what you get from each of them. Like steps are fairly low impact, they're very high recovery, and they're not very time efficient. Whereas like more structured cardio, obviously there's a very large gray area in terms of what that means, but it can very well be the opposite, where it's more time efficient, it's more recovery demanding, and it expends more energy as well. So I think, that they're both tools in the toolbox, and there are certain circumstances where I would use both. Like typically I like to set a certain step threshold in general for almost everyone, because there's very solid research to support like overall health and well-being associated with, like, I think at the moment they're essentially, I mean, when I say I'm talking about overarching research or recommendations from the World Health Organization, but they're essentially saying there is like positive benefits to lifespan or health span associated with beyond, I think, 4,000 steps per day, but you keep getting benefits up to like 7,000+ per day. And at that point, potentially, in order to get more benefits, you need to maybe raise your heart rate even more and do other exercise modalities to continue getting benefits from a maybe cardiovascular standpoint. So that's where if you wanted to get benefits for purely your health, then definitely having bouts of high heart rates and doing something more like interval training, or some like what I do myself is a few times per week, I'll just do 15 minutes at quite a high heart rate on the elliptical just to kind of get some other cardio work in. I'm in the improvement season. I don't need to be doing it for fat loss, that's for sure, but I'm just doing it for overarching health and well-being. I can keep talking here about like more specific circumstances for comp prep and in cutting phases, but Damien, why don't you maybe talk a little bit about when you might narrow down on steps versus like actually adding in some cardio for fat loss specifically?
Yeah, it's really individual dependent, isn't it? Like if you've got someone who has a bit more time on their hands and they're able to get more steps in throughout the day and they don't have to then rely on things like cardio, which like you said is more intense, and it can, I guess, produce more of those, recoverability factors, which potentially, like depending on the individual, like especially if there's a female competitor who is training legs multiple times a week and they're having to do all this cardio, that could then be impacting on their weight training. That's potentially where steps can become a little bit more utilized because, like you said, it is low impact, it is higher recoverability. But, I guess it just becomes down very individual dependent as well. So whereas if you've got someone who is doing, at that kind of limit of 15,000 steps per day and they really can't add anything more above that because it just takes too much time, then potentially that's where cardio could potentially be utilized at that, because it is more time efficient and you're not having to then add on an extra hour or so getting all of these steps in throughout the day. So I think it is very context and individual dependent, and it's probably around that communication on if it is around a coach or if you're having to make that decision on whether you do one or the other. It's really looking at your lifestyle and looking at probably what's going to work best for you at that current point in time.
Yeah. And I think that you could make the case for either. And, especially when people, they almost make that argument of, oh, I choose to do steps instead of cardio because cardio is really fatiguing. Well, you have to think about what are the health benefits and what are going to be the long-term benefits of you actually having greater cardiorespiratory fitness, especially how that translates into your resistance training. So, for example, if someone is doing, some hit sprints over on an assault bike, then sure, in the moment, that's pretty freaking demanding. It's tough, it's fatiguing, but holy smokes, afterwards, do you get like a post assault bike endorphin rush or what? But then afterward, if you're training legs multiple times per week, or hell, even if you're just a dude training them like 2 times per week, like you have to think about the recoverability between your sets because you have actually done that sort of hit training, which hit training is a lot more in line with, the type of training that we're doing as bodybuilders, doing resistance training, hypertrophy training in the gym. So you might actually even have better recoverability between your sets, or, just those sort of health benefits that will translate from the cardio over to your resistance training, which definitely makes the case for why perhaps you should keep it in during the improvement season as well. But then there also just reaches a point too with steps where, like, one, there's a point of diminishing returns for sure, but also steps can be very fatiguing as well on an athlete. And I'm not just talking about like the actual motion of just walking, but psychologically, people can really get in their head if they're just like so opposed to like, no, this is a cardi, no prep. Hell no, am I getting on a Stairmaster? Like I will walk till till I'm lean. But they get to this point where they're like, oh my gosh, they get in this sort of headspace with an attitude of, I've got to get 15,000 steps, 16,000 steps. My coach has me on 20,000 steps. And then they're just like plodding along during the day a little bit miserable, right? And it's like, you don't have to be in this position. Either, you could be a little bit more efficient by doing a little bit of cardiovascular work, which you'll get even more health benefits from as well, or just like bite the bullet and maybe just don't have, your extra Spud Light potatoes at dinner and push yourself into a larger deficit on that means. And also like steps, it's kind of like calories. When people say like a calorie isn't a calorie, right? Like if you have an extra on your macros, 25 grams of carbs left over at night, and you need to hit that extra 100 calories, it's not the equivalent of pouring a bunch of sweet chili sauce on your dinner compared to having maybe that extra 25 grams of carbs from some carrots or some potatoes or pumpkin. Like it's not one for one. So a calorie is not a calorie. A step is not a step. And that's why context is required because, people who they have a step count, let's say they need to hit 10,000 steps at the end of the day. And, they look at their watch at night. They're like, oh man, I'm on 800, like 8,875, got to rack up to 10,000. And they just walk up and down the hall, just like texting on Instagram. That's not the same as going outside on a walk on a windy day, having a chat with a friend, going up and down hills. Like, I can even speak to this from the perspective of like now becoming a kite surfer this past year. Like, me holding a freaking kite that's like over 20 meters in the air, it's like over 10 meters in diameter, walking like upwind, those steps out on the beach, getting like crashed into waves and shiz, like that is not equivalent to a step of like 2.5 kilometers per hour, like post workout, walking on a treadmill, scrolling TikTok.
Mm.
So that's why it's really important. Like, especially context is always required. So especially as a coach, I think too, if you note that like a client's step count is getting really high, it's like, whoa, they're walking 20,000 steps a day. I don't have them on a hell of a lot of food. They're still not dropping weight. What the heck is going on here? Like, get some context. So like they might be racking up 20,000 steps or something. But again, that literally could then be going slow as a snail, plodding along on a treadmill, or just like aimlessly walking up and down a hall or something. It's like it reaches a point of diminishing returns. Like, again, you might as well just be sitting down.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think addressing some of the practical limitations of steps is important. And you discussed so diminishing returns, where for sure, like I would even say potentially that 10,000, like for example, 10,000 steps at week 1 of the prep is not the same as 10,000 steps maybe at week 15 of the prep because of adaptation and even changes in gait. Like you'll notice that the way in which you walk will change towards the end of prep, and it'll be more energy conserving. And I would even encourage competitors or even people in a fat loss phase in general, if they are maybe noticing and they can be reflective enough to determine that, is that essentially I would even encourage people to hop on a treadmill, or at least have some of that walk being structured at a intentional pace. Because if you are just plodding along at like 2 kilometers per hour, or maybe you're pacing around or you're going for a walk outside, which is great, and I encourage that, but like actually intentionally walk at a certain pace. Otherwise you will just find yourself like walking like a zombie, which is not particularly efficient for energy expenditure. And it's why we do steps in a fat loss phase, or one of the main reasons. And the other component is, as Tiara somewhat alluded to, is like actually adding in cardio purely just for the sake of more food. Because there are some competitors who are on, let's say, 100 grams of carbs. If sometimes there is a worthwhile trade-off of just being more active and doing more activity for the sake of having more food, because it can be challenging just to have a very small quantity of food per day for weeks on end. And I think psychologically it can be beneficial from a motivational aspect or internal reward standpoint, to just have a little bit more food, and that is a worthwhile trade-off for doing a bit more cardio.
And it's not just about more food and more calories, but it's also when people get down to like really, really low levels during a prep, like a 45 kilo female who's still trying to get down to 43 kilos and she's on maybe 1,200 calories. It's not just the case of, okay, cool, I want a few more bites of food during the day. When you're getting down to that low level of food, like you have to think about you're not getting a lot of micronutrients in. So if you can actually consume more food, then obviously you can consume more nutrients within your diet as well. Plus, like a means of doing a little bit more output too, like cardiovascular work, it can be an acute appetite suppressant as well. So that's really important. We know that exercise can help to suppress and manage your appetite to a degree. But then also, like there are, of course, there's going to be those benefits to having a few more things to actually do during the day. But yeah, I think it is important to definitely be aware of it, right? And like, even yeah, just being aware, like if you are out for a walk, like the body, it's so good at conserving energy. Jack, you alluded to the fact of, yeah, like your gait starts to change. You start to become super duper efficient, but like even be mindful of, okay, I'm not going to like put my hands in my pockets. Like actually have literally your arms out of your pockets, like so that your arms can actually expend a little bit of energy. Or maybe try your best if you go out for a walk with friends so you can be a little bit more animated. You are expending those few bits of energy as well, actually talking with your hands and of course like vocalizing things, go on a phone call. But again, it's not just for the sake of like burning calories either. We have to remember that there are so many like health benefits to this as well, especially social health.
Mm.
People can get very, very in their heads when they're just, just like kind of becoming a little bit isolated during a prep. So yeah, just go out and have a great old conversation and go for a walk. And steps are just a bonus.
Yeah, the final point that I touch on is just around, so we don't do 20 minutes on one question, which, I mean, that ship has sailed already, but is what modality and intensity maybe someone should be doing for cardio, for fat loss. So I would typically go back to something that is low impact. So ideally not running if you're trying to preserve performance in a comp prep. There are always unicorns out there who want to run, or they can run and they can recover efficiently. But I think we're being on the more conservative side here. So doing something like the elliptical or the spin bike, or I think sometimes like there was a phase almost there, and maybe there still is a phase. I'm not sure where the Stairmaster got a bit of hate, but I think, yes, the Stairmaster is maybe on the slightly more demanding side or recovery demanding side. But I think if competitors, there's almost a bit of an aura around the Stairmaster where they're like, okay, I'm going to lock in and do the Stairmaster, and it's part of a comp prep and it's what the OGs did, and therefore I want to do it too. So I think as long as something can be recovered from and it's not impacting training, I think that's the important thing. And typically I would recommend a heart rate of like around 130 plus beats per minute, but obviously not getting too high to at which point it's becoming demanding from a recovery perspective. So those are just aspects to monitor. Again, the most important thing is you just don't want it suddenly becoming steps. You don't just want to be turning over on the bike at a very, very slow pace, and you may as well just be doing steps at that point, because it's almost a 1-to-1 ratio with the energy expenditure from steps. So you want there to be a noticeable difference in intensity and energy expenditure from actually doing that cardio. Otherwise, it's a bit pointless.
Yeah, you don't want it to be redundant.
Cool. So I thought we'd move on to almost a tangential question around how do you think competitive bodybuilding impacts longevity and health span for older athletes? So I might keep talking on this one because it's a topic that I like and I'm a bit passionate about. So, and I think people often sort of definitely get into the weeds when it comes to longevity. Like longevity is such a big buzzword at the moment. And I'll probably answer this question by more so talking about the bigger brushstrokes of longevity, because yeah, you can talk about saunas, you can talk about all these different supplements like NAD and CoQ10 and all these like resveratrol and the different pathways around mTOR and like
Little do they know, they should just be bodybuilding.
Yeah. No, I think there's definitely a lot of pros to bodybuilding, but there are some potential cons, of course, to consider as well. But the way I often describe longevity is controlled adversity. So basically exposing yourself to certain conditions which challenge you and cause your body to adapt, but don't cause detriment to health, essentially. And I think from a bodybuilding standpoint, bodybuilding embodies a lot of those different things which are conducive for longevity. But it's so individual specific, because you see bodybuilders who like to reference if it fits your macros back in the day, like maybe 10 years ago. Now people would be like, how much crap can I fit into my calories for the day versus how well can I nourish my body on these calories for the day within those constraints. So I think overarchingly with nutrition, if someone is conscious of their nutrition and they eating foods that nourish their body and that support longevity and health from that perspective, then that's a big tick. And I'd like to think that the vast majority of people are doing that. And that's obviously quite a large kind of rabbit hole to go down of like, what does nutrition look like for longevity? Because people talk about these individual nutrients or these individual foods. You've got people like Brian Johnson who eats like the same foods every single day, and he's sort of formulated his diet solely for the purpose of getting as much benefit from the foods as possible. But I think from an umbrella standpoint, just focusing on getting as many plants as you can, getting diversity of those plants, and trying not to have a diet that is too predictable or too monotonous day to day, and mix things up. Like don't just have solely a peanut butter for your fat source, like have 5, 6, 7 different fat sources across the week. Same with your vegetables and your carbohydrate sources and your protein sources as well. Those would just be some bigger rocks to kind of focus on from a nutrition perspective. And I think from other aspects of bodybuilding, so it comes back to that topic of controlled adversity. Like often people reference fasting for longevity or like energy restriction. And there's been literature to indicate that basically energy restriction, so like a calorie deficit, is fairly synonymous to fasting when it comes to autophagy or some of the benefits that you may get from fasting essentially. So what interests me is the comp preps that people do. Like there's been no literature on this from my knowledge, but are the comp preps that people do synonymous to the benefits that you get from basically energy restriction or fasting? Or is it maybe a bit too far gone in terms of, okay, you're doing this for literally 20 weeks, you're losing a lot of weight, and is it maybe a bit too much where it sort of bleeds into aspects that are getting into a bit detrimental to your health? So yeah, I'm quite interested in that, but I think the major component is just the lifestyle that bodybuilding brings about. Being conscious of your nutrition, exercising regularly, like that's probably the major component of having a good foundation of strength and muscle, and that being incredibly protective as you age, especially in terms of the health span related aspect, where one of the major sort of causes of hospitalization or just decrease to quality of life is just reduced muscle mass and reduced function associated with which is basically muscle loss as we age. And having a good, like, basically bodybuilding or strength training into your across all walks of life. Like, and people don't understand when they hear longevity, they think, oh, I don't need to worry about that till I'm 60 or 70 or 75. But the earlier you start, the more benefits you're going to get. You're basically building that foundation and that platform for your later years. So like, even if you're 21 years old and listening to this, like, now is the time to start thinking about certain aspects of longevity, not in an obsessive sense, but just in a sense of like, okay, reinforcing to yourself that, hey, it's great to stay fit and eat well and to look after yourself, essentially, both kind of physically and mentally.
And it's not just from a muscularity standpoint. We have to think about the whole musculoskeletal system. And of course, you touched there on that darn word that I've never been able to pronounce, no matter how many freaking uni exams we took where we had to spell sarcopenia. I don't know. Blame the Canadian accent, all right? Anyway, you get what I mean. When your muscle mass wilts away. But it's not just about, sarcopenia, but of course we have to think about osteopenia as well, and the whole musculoskeletal system, and how about, the large majority of our bone is actually laid down by the time we're about 25 years old. All right. And bone, it's not just a combination of, okay, need to consume enough calcium sources. And if I'm lactose intolerant, get on the sardine train. But it's also about, okay, what's going to be the stimulus for laying down that bone too? And it's resistance, and it's resistance training. So actually lifting a whole bunch of weights and putting yourself, under resistance, especially in your younger years, you're going to build these really effing strong bones, provided that, you're not micronutrient deficient, you're consuming enough calcium, vitamin D, vitamin K, you name it. All right. But bone health is so integral. All right. Having really strong bones, really strong joints, really strong connective tissue, and obviously instilling all of these different lifestyle behaviors and habits and routines in your younger years, then if you can carry that as a lifestyle through in your older age, man, that is going to set you up for living a longer life and a far more higher quality of life as well. Because we know that what predominantly kills people these days, it's obviously heart attacks. So having poor cardiorespiratory fitness, but also people who have falls in later age and they suffer from fractures. If someone falls over and breaks their hip and they have very, very poor bone mineral density, God, they're going to be bedbound. They're going to have to go undertake surgeries. Sometimes they might not even be in the physical capacity to actually warrant a surgery. Unfortunately, with different healthcare systems around the world, sometimes they actually have to make that call to be like, this person, they're not in the, they don't have the capacity to actually take on these medical resources to undertake this surgery. They literally will not actually recover from it. They don't have the strength. So yes, absolutely. If you can do bodybuilding in the most healthy and sustainable manner, and really instill those sort of habits and behaviors and routines and disciplines and truly love the lifestyle in your younger years and carry that through to older age, man, just the benefits of eating well and lifting weights, holy smokes, you are absolutely going to set yourself up for a really high quality of life in later age.
Yeah, I think as well, if we look at what the core principles of bodybuilding are, it's resistance training, it's eating food, and it's doing that over a long period of time. And, if we do that well, and if it is structured in the correct manner, and you're taking that from, our early years into our older years, that's setting yourself up, for retaining muscle during that period. And even though I'm working as a clinical dietitian and working in hospitals, and you've kind of mentioned around sarcopenia and, the health risks that are associated with that. And the majority of people we see as clinical dietitians are malnourished and who we diagnose with malnutrition. the people, it is elderly people who fall, and they may, they break their hip, and they don't have the muscle mass then required to be able to get back into rehab, and they have longer hospital stays because of that, and then that impacts their health being in hospital longer, and that increases risk of infection, and it just becomes a really, really challenging time for them, just potentially because they weren't eating enough protein, or they were having some resistance training. And sure, that's really breaking it down into that kind of simple terms, but it definitely happens, and it's definitely things that we see as clinical dietitians within that clinical space. And yeah, again, the majority of people that we see aren't getting enough protein. And I guess if we're looking again at that bodybuilding lifestyle, it's focusing on those whole foods, lean protein sources, resistance training, which can help with building and retaining muscle. So yeah, if done right and if done over long periods of time, bodybuilding can have fantastic benefits for longevity and for health for sure.
Yeah, it's just ingrained into you, and it's just going to become a default. Like in later life, like whenever you're faced with those decisions, and sure, it doesn't seem like much during the day, but over time, every single decision that you make when it comes to food, if you're eating 3 to 4 to 5 times per day, every single day of your life, if the majority of the time you're always defaulting to, okay, cool, like I have the knowledge and the awareness of what types of food have protein in them, what types of food, actually resemble a plant, and have fruits and vegetables, and you have dietary fiber and etc. It doesn't mean that you need to be tracking everything to the gram, on MyFitnessPal or Macro Factor till the day that you die. All right. But you do that for long enough and you just know it. It's ingrained into you, and you'll always default to those things. You'll always gravitate toward those things. So over time, as years go on upon your life, you will always be opting for, okay, high protein foods, high fiber foods, colorful foods, micronutrient rich foods. And man, you do that for long enough, and inevitably we're all going to keep aging. Man, you're really, really going to set yourself up for just being very healthy in the later years of life and having a really high quality of life. So yeah, I think there's so many benefits to the bodybuilding lifestyle. But once again, it doesn't mean that you need to be 84 years old and, still going through a 20-week prep with Jack Radford Smith or something.
I think that's as well, like people, when they think bodybuilding, they just think stage, and they think it's getting on stage and it's going through prep and all that. But it is that lifestyle component. It's that all cliche bodybuilding is a lifestyle, but it really is. Like, it doesn't just mean getting on stage and going through a competition phase and things like that. It can just be, I guess you guys have alluded to many times before in podcasts, it's that hobby building. You can class yourself as a hobby builder. Where you're still going to the gym, you're still mindful of what you're eating, you're still having rich protein sources with diversity with plant foods, and really focusing in on your health. You could class that as your own style of bodybuilding. So yeah, there's many, many different ways to, I guess, classify what you would say is bodybuilding.
Yeah, you spend far more time not in comp preps, or definitely not on the bodybuilding stage if you're living the lifestyle long term.
Yeah, I think one point which we haven't talked about is, going back to the first question, is just cardio. So if you do want to be the most cardiovascularly fit version of you, then I probably would recommend some cardio, more so the higher intensity versions of cardio, like maybe HIIT or hopping on there for a shorter period and basically having maintaining a higher heart rate throughout that, not just for fitness, but also for that sort of version of controlled adversity, which is almost addressing that through different pathways. Because you might have periods of energy restriction, you obviously have your resistance training as well. You can delve into the weeds of maybe different supplements which give you a controlled adversity, or at least switch on those pathways. But two other points that I just quickly touch on in addition would be the off-season and comp prep. Like, as I was alluding to before, I think like setting yourself up for the best comp prep possible if you want to maximize longevity probably is important, because again, you don't want it to kind of tip off that edge where it goes from being adversity that is positive for health to adversity that is causing detriment that you then have to like recover from for long periods afterwards. Like, maybe it'll impact, like as Sierra said, she alluded to, if you don't eat enough calcium for 25 weeks in your comp prep, like you may get some bone loss, which is no longer beneficial for longevity. Like, maybe the cons are outweighing the pros there. And also in the improvement season as well, if someone is getting like very, very far away from their stage weight or their kind of homeostatic point, then like that's probably not overly beneficial for longevity either to get maybe. And that's maybe the one aspect of bodybuilding, maybe more so for males than females, around being quite heavy and like obviously having a lot of muscle. That maybe, I guess, when you look at people who do live longer, and this is more of like a trend, or I'd have to look more into other blue zones and literature supported by people's body mass. But typically you see people who are smaller, even people with slightly more conservative testosterone, who this is in males, of course, who do live longer. And therefore, if your body is trying to support a larger system, a larger anabolic environment is trying to maintain more muscle tissue. So if we're talking about like there's a difference between resistance training for functionality and to avoid sarcopenia versus resistance training to be big and having as much muscle as possible. Like that's where, again, hypothetically, or from a theorization or hypothesis standpoint, is that maybe taking it to the extreme for longevity, where you're just literally causing more demand on the body to maintain these structures, which is that really the most conducive thing for longevity. Longevity is about conservation. So yeah.
Let's be honest, you're far more likely to run into that conundrum if you go down the enhanced bodybuilding route.
Yeah. But we have enhanced listeners on this podcast, and I'm also, as you know, I like to delve into the weeds. So it's the part, and it's like purely because I am enthusiastic about longevity for myself, and I'm like, what is the trade-off in bodybuilding? Is it even applicable to naturals in general? Like maybe it's not. I would hazard a guess as it's not, because like muscle is so protective that, and we're not exactly getting to fat-free mass indexes of 30 and above. So I'd like to think that it's purely beneficial, the amount of muscles that natural bodybuilders have.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just from a muscularity standpoint, but, some people in their improvement seasons and their building seasons, if you are pushing up your overall body weight to very high degrees, and you might actually reach that point where it's like, oh man, you could probably warrant a mini cut. But some people, let's be honest, right? Like they do push their levels of body fat to a point where, yeah, this isn't really conducive for overall health. It's not necessary. It's probably actually not really aiding your results anymore. But they might be under that impression that, they need to keep getting bigger. That's obviously going to wane in on your health too, because if you have higher levels of body fat coincided, maybe if you're not doing a lot of cardiovascular work, maybe if you aren't consuming the most nutritious diet, right? Obviously there you can actually run into points where you might actually become a little bit more insulin insensitive. And we know that that's another big thing for actually longevity and overall health span, is actually having really good blood glucose regulation, really good blood glucose level control, and great insulin sensitivity as well. So maintaining a healthy body weight or not having too high levels of body fat, that's really important too, coincided with keeping up the resistance training, keeping up the cardiovascular work. That's going to be phenomenal for your insulin sensitivity as well, and your ability to actually, just utilize carbohydrates and really control your blood sugar levels.
Cool. No, I think that topic is exhausted. So until next episode where we can talk about longevity more. But
that was basically a cardio workout.
Get Jack Rapitis on the tangent with longevity. We'll be here all day.
Well, speaking of tangents, like this one's for you, Damien, and I'm actually going to extrapolate this to Tiara and I. Like the question says, I need to know more about Damien's Crumpet obsession, but I want to, like, is there also a food maybe for Tiara that she's been obsessed over, or that maybe I've been obsessed over as well? But yeah, tell the people about the crumpets. Like, what's the backstory there?
I mean, if you don't know what a crumpet is, first of all, then we need to have a serious discussion. I've actually had many international followers and listeners message me asking what a crumpet is, where they can find them, because I don't believe they have them in the US. So there's even people from South America asking where crumpets are and what they where you get them. But I guess how I would explain a crumpet, first of all, if you don't know what a crumpet is kind of like between an English muffin and like a pancake, kind of. Like it's kind of like soft on top. You would usually toast them, from my understanding. I've not really had one that's not toasted. But where the obsessions come from, I can't say there was one particular time like where it was just like there was an obsession. I think just over time I've just started gravitating towards having them more frequently. Like they would always be my pre-workout meal when I would train fairly early in the morning. Like I would get up at around 3:30 in the morning to go to train at about 4, 4:15. So I would need something that was quite low in fiber, quite high, like high digesting, and that could be consumed pretty quickly. So I opted more towards crumpets, and that's kind of just stayed with me for the past over 6 months during prep, and have become quite attached to my crumpets, having them most mornings. So yeah, I think that's just built the obsession around that. It's now just, I guess, a part of me. The crumpets are, they're within my lifestyle. I fit them in as much as I can. So yeah, and I also got my daughter to have a crumpet every now and then with me, and we put, she might have jam on it. We might put some fruit on it as well. So I'm trying to get the whole household included with having crumpets as well, which is fun. So I was even talking to Jack about a potential series, which I might open up here on the podcast and see what the listeners think about a series around Crumpet and putting in different foods with crumpets, maybe things around maybe sardines and crumpets. Does that work? Other things around, poached eggs and crumpets. I'm open to ideas. So maybe if some people want to leave some things in the comment section on YouTube or Spotify, then we might be able to get something going. But yeah, what do you guys think? Do you enjoy a crumpet every now and then?
I mean, I love crumpets. I can't say I've had them in a while, and that's not intentionally. It's just one of those things where I don't walk through the bread aisle and think about crumpets, but they are delicious.
That's just really
They are kind of hard to describe though, because like they have those indentations on top, like they're a little soft, but they're more so almost a little elasticated. Like I'm not sure how to kind of, maybe they're super high in gluten. Like we know that gluten is kind of creates that elastic component of bread. So I'm not sure, but yeah, they are.
I would say it's almost like a combination of like it's pretty universal if anyone's ever had McDonald's, like a McMuffin, but it's almost like a combination of a McMuffin with like a pancake, maybe like that sort of texture, maybe
it's
like
that pancake bottom with the muffin kind of top.
Sprinkle in a little bit of a waffle.
Yeah.
But I love how it's going international. Like you've literally got people in other countries being like, what are these crumpet things?
Yep. I had to send through the ingredients and the nutrition panel for one person. They were that intrigued with them. So yeah, if they would last the flight over, I'd send some, but I don't know how that would go.
It's like when I first moved to Australia, I became aware of these things called pikelets. Right? It's like these pancakes that they sell, but they're like mini little pancakes and they come in stacks and you can buy them at the grocery store, but they're not pancakes, they're pikelets.
Well, I mean, I could probably list 5 things off the top of my head for you, Tiara, about food obsessions. But
take a hot guess at the number 1.
It would be sardines, probably.
Yeah, I love sardines so ridiculously much. I am just shamelessly just an absolute sardine queen. And funnily enough, obviously my name is Tiara, like the crown, but I feel like if I was to actually wear a crown, it would like be a crown with like little fish on it. But sardines, man, like if I could name one food on the planet that is just bound to nourish you and satiate you, and it's just like bursting with frickin' micronutrients all in one, it's a can of sardines. Like you've got the HBB protein. Like, did you know a can of sardines has the same amount of calcium as a cup of milk? So because it has those little pressurized bones, it's fantastic for people who are lactose intolerant and love, something a little bit fishy. But, the omega-3s in a can of sardines as well, they're a great source of collagen too. They're so convenient. You don't need to refrigerate them. You can take them anywhere. I take them on planes. Like I eat sardines literally everywhere. But yeah, they're super satiating as well. Like if you just want to curb your hunger, like have a can of sardines. So yeah, sardines are just amazing. And I love if I could just influence, just one person at a time to get on the sardine train. Like that makes me so ridiculously happy. I feel like I'm making a positive, impact on the world. And even like when I'm doing dietetic consultations and I ask people like, you guys just would as too, like, so do you have any allergies or intolerances? And they're like, yeah, no, I basically eat everything. You're like, everything? Do you eat sardines? And when people are like, yeah, I could get amongst a can of sardines, I'm like, oh my gosh, like you and we're going to be friends. So yeah, sardines, number 1, baby. Just get amongst it. Absolutely get amongst it. I really encourage people to have the ones in spring water though, compared to like oils. Even if it says like, virgin olive oil, sometimes it can be a bit of a blend. And even then, sometimes, people they're not often like me. They won't like slurp the sardine juice. So they'll usually drain the oil off. But you have to think if you're getting a can of sardines and oil or even like tomato sauce and things of that nature, if you're draining it, you might actually be draining away some of the omega-3 fatty acids. And it's like, no, those things are really good for you. So yeah, get amongst it with a can of sardines, a little spoon. And yeah, it's a good time. But Jack, what are you obsessed with?
So what about you, Jack?
I mean, I think
buckwheat,
I'm going to,
obviously.
Yeah, I'm going to live up to my own stereotype here of saying extra virgin olive oil, which, again, as I said on a previous episode, it's kind of come full circle where I used to have a lot, but not because I wanted it, and then kind of almost having a fear of dietary fat, and then coming back to now my dietary fat being the highest it's ever been, and doing more kind of self-research into the benefits of extra virgin olive oil and kind of why it's a key component of the Mediterranean diet, and how it's so antioxidant and polyphenol rich, anti-inflammatory. So yeah, I have a lot of, like, my fat intake at the moment is actually like 145 grams per day. So, and about 40 grams of that is olive oil. So yeah, solid. I have 20 grams on 2 of my meals. And yeah, it's I wouldn't say I'm obsessed with it, but it's like a key component of my diet, which I enjoy, and it tastes good, of course, and comes with some amazing health benefits. So the hard part is just finding the right olive oil. Like, you want to get one that is very high quality. Otherwise, you're just having like 40, like X amount of lower quality oil per day. So
So do you choose a specific type of olive oil then?
I use Cobram Estate, and they have like a more sort of premium grade olive oil. Like, that's just the one that I'm using at the moment, but I might change to one that is even more kind of specialized. They are very, very pricey. So that's the only consideration for me at the moment.
Gosh, Jack, I'm thinking like, man, you start to travel the world in the future. Like, are you maybe going to be like a bit of an olive oil connoisseur? Like, there's another word I can't pronounce, connoisseur. But either, you know how people, they go around the world and they're like, "Ooh, I want to sip wine." Jack's like, "Ooh, I want to sip
Yeah.
olive oil," or like screw coffee beans and coffee farms. You're going amongst the olive farms. Yeah, I would be really interested if when you come back to Australia, like just getting things through customs and imports, like if you're going to bring back all these like just really fancy types of like olive oil from different places in the world, that'd be kind of neat. Like,
Yeah.
you don't need to collect coins or stamps.
Yeah. I mean,
Little olive
I
oil
definitely,
tasting platter.
yeah. I don't drink, so I mean, olive oil is definitely a good option, and I like
Imagine
things that I
having
can
like a
actually use.
cellar for olive oil instead of wine,
Yeah, I mean,
That'd
if
be sick.
people are listening for my next birthday, then yeah, get me some high quality olive oil. I definitely won't go unnoticed.
But yeah, this has been such a fantastic podcast. But, in true TBD spirit, we are going to finish on something that we learned this week. So, Damien, what did you learn this week?
So I was down in Canberra for the ASEAN Nationals, and whilst down there, my dad and I went to the War Memorial Museum down there, which was absolutely fascinating. If no one's ever been before to see it, it's free. It's free to go, and you can literally spend all day there. We spent about 4 hours there, just walking through and looking at all the memorial pieces there. And yeah, it was a really, really special time with my dad had served in the Air Force before, so it was really, really special to have that time with him there. And the amount of history that's within that place is absolutely fantastic. But there was one in particular piece of history that I thought was quite interesting that was food related. So shock, I gravitated towards that. But I had to take a photo of it because I knew that it was something that I may forget because I was only one day post prep and my brain was still a little bit foggy. I'm going to slightly read it out so I get the details and the facts correct. But in World War I, there was a particular general who was teaching his battalion how to throw grenades. He decided instead of throwing a grenade into the enemy lines, he would throw a tin of cured meat, just to show the example of how you would throw a grenade. It threw it into the enemy lines, and this was the Australians throwing it into the French, and the French ended up looking at the meat and ended up eating it, and then they ended up throwing something back. And it was a box of cigarettes, and with a note attached saying, "Thank you so much for your gift. We have then regifted you something else," being the box of cigarettes. And it was just this funny thing of, they're actually teaching them how to throw a grenade by throwing meat, and they thought it was a gift, and they're throwing another gift back. And I just thought that was quite hilarious. A bit of history with a bit of food attached to it as well.
Love that. Peace, no war.
Yeah.
Reminds me of
exactly.
that. I think maybe in World War I or II, there was an occasion with the Australians where maybe it may have been on Christmas Day where they ended up playing cricket together or something like that.
That's right. Yeah.
Which is a nice story. What about you, Tiara?
Wow. What I learned this past week, I learned just how darn good the egg yolks of chickens who are fed like a phenomenally nutritious diet actually taste. And there is a distinct difference because really, I love saving $1 or $2 when I go grocery shopping. I'm a big fan of shopping at this discount fruit barn called the Cabbage Patch. And, there you get things like 1-cent avocados. And yeah, sometimes they can be a little bit questionable, or like 9 cent per kilo zucchinis, etc. But I generally buy my eggs there because you get these cage-free eggs. They're like a dozen eggs for $2.99. Sure, maybe those chickens aren't in a cage, but let's be honest, I don't really know what those chickens are eating. But one of my clients, her name is Rebecca. She was super duper generous, and she came to Breathwork a few weeks ago. And basically she has 3 chickens, right, as pets, and they lay eggs, and she eats the eggs, and she gifted me some of her eggs. And oh my gosh, telling you guys, I eat an egg every single day. I have been for years on end. And wow, like the taste and the flavor of these egg yolks from these chickens that clearly have a very nutritious diet. Because like, I almost feel as though I might have like indirectly influenced what these chickens are eating, because Rebecca, you know, she eats a whole bunch of fruits and vegetables too, being part of Team TV, taking care of herself, but she feeds her chickens all of the scraps, you know, from her fruits and vegetables. And then these chickens, they lay eggs, and oh my gosh, just like the yolks are like bursting with flavor and micronutrients. So yeah, that's what I learned this past week. Like just how darn healthy and tasty, like a really high quality fresh egg, it's truly capable, you know, of being. That was just, it was amazing.
Even the color of the yolk is different with those
Yeah.
versus like store-bought eggs. The color of the yolk is just, wildly different.
So vibrant. So yeah, she was so new, like so generous, and she even like gave me a whole bunch of spinach as well from her garden. So yeah, Rebecca, you're the bomb. Yeah, and your chickens, damn, they taste not the chickens, you know, the chickens' eggs, they taste damn fine. But Jack, what did you learn this past week?
Mine's going to be pretty boring in comparison to both of you, but Damien and I went to Canberra, as he said, for ICN Nationals, and it was my first experience, and not a great experience, as Damien can attest to. Collectively, not a great experience with the mechanism at which they were using for their doors. It was the first time in which I've used a mobile phone to act as like the swipe key on a door and to get in and out of the room. And basically we had a nightmare with basically setting up the key on your phone. And it was not a great process. Like they need to work on that. You had to download an app. You had to then link it to the apartment complex, and you had to call a call center to do that. And especially for an Airbnb where you're having people in and out regularly, it's potentially not the best way of doing it. So I had no idea that they'd like transition to that method for some, but makes sense because your phone's always on you. But not something I hope is a little bit smoother next time.
And is that just something that's just in Canberra?
No, I think
like the Australian Capital Territory has these very specific, like frustrating doors.
No, I think I'm presuming that it's commonplace now for new apartment complexes. Yeah.
I mean, in theory, it's fantastic because, like you said, everyone has their phone on you, and you don't have to have that physical card. Like you can issue multiple then keys with anyone who has the app, but it was just an absolute nightmare to actually organize, unfortunately. So, funnily enough, there was someone, Jack, who when Dad and I went out later to go and get some food, there was someone who'd been sitting there with the same problem, who'd been sitting there for 2 hours and couldn't get inside their Airbnb. Yeah. So we were lucky that we had one that actually worked.
Yes, well, there we go. And I think that pretty much wraps up today's episode. So thanks everyone for tuning in. If you enjoyed, please don't hesitate to leave a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you're on YouTube, you can leave a like or a comment, and we'll catch everyone next week for another episode.